Few people ever witness the exact moment an empath reaches their limit. It does not happen during the first betrayal. It does not happen after one argument. It does not even happen after a series of disappointments. In fact, one of the most misunderstood truths about empaths is that they often tolerate far more pain than anyone around them realizes. They keep giving chances when others would walk away. They keep trying to understand when others would judge. They keep hoping when the evidence says they should stop. This is why many people assume an empath will always forgive, always return, and always find a reason to stay. They see the empathy, the patience, and the endless willingness to understand, and they mistake it for a permanent state of being, a fixed quality that will never waver no matter how much damage is inflicted. They believe that because the empath has absorbed so much already, there is no limit to what they can continue to absorb. But that belief hides a reality that few people fully understand. There is a line that even the most compassionate person cannot cross forever. There is a point where patience turns into clarity, where understanding turns into acceptance, and where forgiveness is no longer enough to repair what has been broken. The human heart, no matter how expansive, has finite resources. The emotional reserves that allow an empath to keep giving, keep hoping, and keep believing do not regenerate infinitely when they are constantly depleted without replenishment. There comes a moment when the well runs dry, and when that happens, the landscape of the relationship changes irreversibly. What makes this subject so fascinating is that the final breaking point for an empath is rarely caused by a single event. It is usually the result of a deeper realization. A realization that develops quietly over time, like a slow leak that eventually floods the entire basement. Many people think empaths leave because they become angry. The truth is often much more complex. Anger is a surface emotion, a flash of heat that can be extinguished or redirected. What lies beneath the anger is often something far more permanent, a profound disappointment that settles into the bones and changes the way the empath sees the person they once loved. Research on emotional boundaries and relationship patterns shows that highly empathetic people tend to spend a great deal of time trying to understand the motives, fears, and wounds of others. They naturally search for explanations. They naturally look beneath the surface. Yet this strength can sometimes keep them connected to situations long after the warning signs become obvious, because understanding someone's pain can easily become a justification for tolerating their harmful behavior. The real shift begins when they stop asking why someone hurt them and start accepting that the hurt may not have been accidental at all. It is the moment when empathy stops being a bridge and starts being a blindfold, and the empath finally chooses to remove it. In this video, you will discover what many people get completely wrong about empaths and forgiveness. You will learn why empaths often stay longer than expected, what causes the first crack in their trust, and the hidden psychological moment that changes everything. We will explore the difference between mistakes and choices, why repeated emotional wounds affect empaths so deeply, and why their final goodbye often appears sudden, even though it has been building for months or even years. Most importantly, you will learn about the point of no return, the moment when an empath stops fighting to save a relationship and begins protecting their own peace instead. This is not a decision made in haste or in anger. It is a decision that emerges from the ashes of countless disappointments, a decision that feels less like a choice and more like a survival instinct finally breaking through the fog of hope. The final sections of this video reveal one of the least discussed truths about empath psychology. A truth that explains why some relationships can never return to what they once were after trust has been broken. Many people never see this transformation happening until it is already complete, because the empath's internal world is often a secret garden that they guard fiercely, even from those closest to them. By the end of this video, you will understand not only what an empath never forgives, but why that realization becomes one of the most life-changing moments in their journey. So, stay with us until the very end, because each piece of this story builds toward a powerful insight that few people recognize until it is too late. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy exploring the hidden patterns of empathy, human behavior, relationships, and emotional intelligence, make sure to subscribe and join our growing community for more deep insights in every video. One of the biggest reasons empaths stay in painful situations longer than most people is because they are always searching for the good that still exists beneath the surface. While others focus on what a person is doing right now, empaths often focus on who that person could become. They see potential where others see problems. They see possibility where others see warning signs. This is not because they are naive. It is because they naturally look deeper than most people. Their perception is attuned to the invisible architecture of the human soul, the hidden wounds, the buried dreams, and the unspoken desires that drive people's actions. When someone acts cold, an empath wonders what pain caused that behavior. When someone becomes distant, the empath looks for hidden fears. When someone says something hurtful, the empath tries to understand the emotions behind the words. Their minds are wired to search for meaning. They are less interested in judging people and more interested in understanding them. This quality makes them compassionate friends, supportive partners, and caring human beings. But it can also place them in situations where they continue giving chances long after those chances should have ended. An empath often believes that people can change. They believe growth is possible. They believe healing is possible. They believe that if someone is struggling, they can eventually become a better version of themselves. This belief is not just an intellectual position. It is a deep spiritual conviction that sees the light in everyone, even when that light is obscured by clouds of dysfunction. Because of this belief, they often separate a person's actions from a person's potential. Instead of looking at repeated behavior, they focus on future possibilities. They tell themselves that the person is going through a difficult period. They convince themselves that things will improve once certain problems are solved. They hold on to hope because hope feels more comfortable than acceptance. Hope allows them to continue loving without confronting the painful truth of the present moment. It allows them to postpone the grief that acceptance would bring. It allows them to avoid the devastating realization that they have been investing in a mirage. Acceptance sometimes means facing painful truths. It means admitting that someone may not become the person they promised to be. It means accepting that love alone cannot transform someone who refuses to change. It means acknowledging that their own efforts, no matter how heroic, cannot substitute for another person's willingness to grow. For many empaths, this realization takes a very long time to reach because it requires them to let go of an identity they have held for years, the identity of the healer, the fixer, the one who never gives up. Another reason empaths give endless chances is because they understand human weakness. They know that nobody is perfect. They know that people make mistakes. Since they are aware of their own flaws, they often extend the same understanding to everyone around them. This sounds admirable, and often it is. The problem begins when understanding becomes an excuse. A single mistake deserves compassion. A difficult period deserves patience. Temporary struggles deserve support, but repeated harmful behavior cannot always be explained away. Yet, empaths frequently try. They become experts at finding reasons for actions that continue to hurt them. They tell themselves the other person is stressed. They say the person had a difficult childhood. They point to past trauma. They focus on fears, insecurities, and emotional wounds. In many cases, these explanations are true. The other person may genuinely be struggling, but understanding why someone behaves badly does not erase the damage caused by that behavior. Many empaths spend years trying to heal people who never asked to be healed. They become emotionally invested in another person's growth. They celebrate small improvements. They overlook major setbacks. They continue believing that one more conversation will finally create change. One more chance, one more promise, one more attempt. Meanwhile, the reality in front of them remains unchanged. The same arguments continue. The same disappointments continue. The same wounds continue reopening. Yet, because empaths see the pain behind people's actions, they often focus on the wound instead of the weapon. They look at what hurt the other person rather than what the other person is doing to them. This can create a cycle that becomes difficult to escape. Over time, this strength slowly begins turning into a weakness. Compassion becomes self-sacrifice. Patience becomes endurance. Understanding becomes tolerance. The empath keeps carrying emotional weight that does not belong to them. They become so focused on helping someone else that they stop protecting themselves. They spend energy explaining behavior that should not require explanation. They spend years waiting for change that never arrives. What once made them strong begins keeping them trapped. Not because kindness is wrong. Not because empathy is wrong. But because every strength becomes dangerous when it exists without boundaries. Kindness without boundaries is a river that floods its banks and destroys everything in its path. Empathy without boundaries is a door that is always open, inviting in anyone who wishes to enter, regardless of their intentions. Eventually, a shift begins to occur. It usually happens quietly. There is rarely a dramatic moment. There is rarely a single event that changes everything overnight. Instead, the empath starts noticing small details that once escaped their attention. They begin connecting experiences that previously seemed unrelated. The excuses become harder to believe. The explanations begin losing their power. The stories they once told themselves no longer provide comfort. This is where the first crack in trust appears. Trust rarely disappears all at once. It weakens little by little, like a stone being worn down by the constant drip of water. The first crack often forms when an empath notices repetition. A forget may not seem significant. A moment of dishonesty may appear forgivable. A period of emotional distance may feel understandable. But when these events repeat again and again, they start creating a pattern. Patterns are difficult to ignore because they reveal consistency. A mistake can happen once. A pattern reveals intention, priorities, and character. The empath starts noticing that certain behaviors never truly change. The apologies sound familiar. The explanations sound familiar. The promises sound familiar. Every cycle begins to feel strangely predictable. A hurtful action occurs. An explanation follows. A promise is made. Hope returns. Then the behavior repeats. At first, the empath believes the cycle is temporary. Later, they begin questioning whether the cycle is actually permanent. Repeated dishonesty often becomes one of the earliest signs, not necessarily dramatic lies. Sometimes the lies are small, broken promises, half-truths, missing information, statements that never quite match reality. Each individual incident may appear minor, yet trust is built through consistency. Every dishonest moment removes a small piece of that foundation. The empath begins noticing that words and actions are no longer aligned. What someone says and what someone does become two different things. This creates confusion. Confusion creates doubt. Doubt slowly weakens trust. Repeated disrespect creates another crack. Respect is not only about words. It is reflected in behavior. It is reflected in effort. It is reflected in consideration. The empath begins noticing moments where their feelings are dismissed. Their concerns are ignored. Their needs are treated as inconveniences. The person who once seemed caring now appears careless. The person who promised understanding now appears indifferent. Small moments accumulate. One by one, they create a picture that becomes impossible to ignore. Emotional neglect can be even more damaging because it is often invisible. There may be no obvious conflict, no dramatic betrayal, no major argument. Instead, there is absence. Absence of effort, absence of emotional support, absence of genuine connection. The empath starts feeling alone even while remaining in the relationship. Conversations lose depth. Vulnerability feels one-sided. Emotional needs remain unmet. This kind of neglect is difficult to identify at first because nothing dramatic is happening. Yet, over time, it creates a quiet loneliness that slowly drains the emotional energy, like a slow leak in a tire that eventually leaves you stranded on the side of the road. The most painful part is realizing these experiences are no longer isolated incidents. The empath begins reviewing the past with new eyes. Events that once seemed unrelated suddenly connect together. The pattern becomes visible. And once a pattern becomes visible, it cannot be unseen. The mind starts collecting evidence automatically. Every repeated behavior strengthens the realization that this is not temporary. This is not accidental. This is becoming normal. That realization changes the emotional landscape completely. Hope begins competing with reality. The empath still wants to believe. They still want to see the good. They still want to trust. Yet, reality keeps presenting the same evidence. The gap between who they thought the person was and who the person consistently proves themselves to be grows larger. The empath feels torn between the story they believed and the reality unfolding before them. This internal conflict is exhausting because it requires them to hold two opposing truths simultaneously, the truth of their love and the truth of their pain. As this internal conflict grows, another realization begins emerging. It is often the most painful realization of all. At first, the empath believed the hurt was accidental. They believed the person did not understand the consequences of their actions. They believed awareness would create change. They believed honesty would create understanding. They believed communication would solve the problem. But eventually, a difficult question appears. What if the person already knows? This question changes everything. Accidental pain is easier to forgive because it leaves room for innocence. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has moments of poor judgment. Everyone hurts someone unintentionally at some point in life. Empaths understand this better than most people. They are willing to forgive mistakes because mistakes are part of being human. A person can learn from them. A person can grow from them. A person can become better because of them. Intentional pain feels completely different. The emotional wound becomes deeper because it is no longer about the action itself. It becomes about awareness. The empath begins realizing that conversations have already happened. Boundaries have already been explained. Feelings have already been expressed. The other person knows exactly what causes pain. They know exactly what creates damage. Yet, the behavior continues. This realization often arrives slowly, like the dawn creeping over the horizon, illuminating a landscape that was hidden in darkness. The empath starts noticing that certain actions occurred despite clear communication. Certain boundaries continue being crossed despite repeated discussions. Certain forms of disrespect continued despite direct requests for change. The issue is no longer lack of understanding. The issue is lack of concern. That is when manipulation becomes impossible to ignore. Manipulation is rarely obvious in the beginning. It often hides behind excuses, guilt, promises, and emotional confusion. The empath may be made to feel responsible for problems they did not create. They may be encouraged to doubt their own perceptions. They may be convinced that their reactions are the real problem rather than the behavior causing those reactions. Because empaths naturally question themselves, they can remain trapped in these dynamics longer than others. They keep searching for fairness. They keep giving the benefit of the doubt. But eventually patterns reveal the truth. The empath starts noticing how their kindness is being used against them. Their patience becomes expected. Their forgiveness becomes assumed. Their understanding becomes exploited. Instead of appreciating empathy, the other person begins relying on it. They begin treating forgiveness as a guarantee rather than a gift. They become comfortable crossing lines because they believe there will always be another chance waiting on the other side. This is where the emotional injury reaches its deepest level. The deepest wound is not necessarily the lie. It is not necessarily the betrayal. It is not necessarily the neglect. The deepest wound is realizing that someone understood your heart and still chose actions that would damage it. The empath begins seeing moments from the past differently. Conversations take on new meaning. Promises sound different in memory. Situations that once appeared confusing suddenly make sense. The truth becomes clearer with every reflection. The person was not unaware. The person was informed. The person was not confused. The person understood. The person simply made choices that benefited themselves despite knowing the emotional cost. That realization creates a kind of heartbreak that is difficult to describe, because the empath is no longer grieving what happened. They are grieving what they believed. They are grieving the image they held onto. They are grieving the hope that kept them staying. They are grieving the belief that understanding would eventually create change. It is a grief for the future that will never arrive, for the person who never truly existed except in their imagination, and for the years they spent chasing a ghost. And once that realization begins taking root, the emotional distance that follows becomes almost impossible to stop. One of the most confusing moments for people who have hurt an empath comes when the empath suddenly becomes distant. For a long time, the empath seemed available. They listened. They cared. They tried to fix problems. They stayed through situations that would have caused many other people to leave. Then one day, everything changes. The messages become shorter. The emotional energy disappears. The effort fades. The person who once fought so hard to keep the connection alive suddenly seems detached. To the outside observer, this change often appears unexpected. It looks sudden. It looks impulsive. It looks like the empath woke up one morning and decided to walk away. But that is rarely what actually happened. The truth is that most empaths begin leaving emotionally long before they leave physically. The process starts quietly beneath the surface, like tectonic plates shifting imperceptibly before the earthquake strikes. While everyone else believes the relationship is continuing normally, the empath is already carrying a growing sense of sadness. They are already noticing things they wish were different. They are already questioning whether the connection can survive. They are already feeling the weight of disappointments that continue piling up over time. Long before distance becomes visible, grief has already entered the relationship. This grief is different from the grief people experience after a loss. It is grief that happens while the person is still present. The empath begins mourning what the relationship could have been. They begin mourning the promises that were never fulfilled. They begin mourning the effort that never arrived. They begin mourning the version of the future they once believed in. This emotional process can last for months or even years. During this period, the empath continues trying. They continue communicating. They continue giving opportunities for change. But beneath those efforts, something deeper is happening. Every disappointment leaves a mark. Every broken promise leaves a mark. Every ignored boundary leaves a mark. Every moment of emotional neglect leaves a mark. The empath keeps hoping these wounds will heal. They keep hoping new experiences will replace old pain. Yet, when the same patterns continue repeating, the emotional damage accumulates. What makes this difficult to see is that empaths rarely announce every stage of this process. They do not always tell people exactly how much they are hurting. They often carry the burden silently. They continue functioning. They continue supporting others. They continue showing kindness. Meanwhile, they are slowly exhausting their emotional reserves. Many people mistake patience for unlimited tolerance. They assume that because the empath stayed yesterday, they will stay tomorrow. Because the empath forgave before, they will forgive again. Because the empath continued caring, they will always continue caring. What they fail to understand is that every act of forgiveness requires emotional energy. Every attempt to rebuild trust requires emotional energy. Every effort to maintain hope requires emotional energy. Eventually, even the strongest heart reaches a point where there is nothing left to give. By the time the empath starts becoming distant, they have often spent countless hours replaying conversations in their mind. They have examined the relationship from every angle. They have searched for solutions. They have searched for explanations. They have searched for reasons to stay. They have already fought internal battles that nobody else ever witnessed. They have already cried tears that nobody saw. They have already faced truths they desperately wished were not true. That is why the distance seems sudden only to the other person. For the empath, it has been developing for a very long time. The emotional separation starts with small changes. They stop sharing as much. They stop opening up about every thought and feeling. They stop reaching out first. They stop expecting support. They stop expecting understanding. The expectations that once fueled the relationship begin fading away. The empath lowers those expectations because experience has taught them not to expect different results. This creates an interesting shift. The empath may still be physically present, but emotionally they begin stepping back. They become more observant, more quiet, more reflective. They stop investing the same level of emotional energy because they are trying to protect what remains of themselves. They are no longer fighting for the relationship in the same way. They are evaluating whether the relationship is worth continuing at all. The person on the other side often misses these signs because they are focused on the final decision rather than the process leading to it. They notice this goodbye, but not the months of sadness that came before it. They notice the silence, but not the years of disappointment that created it. They notice the distance, but not the emotional exhaustion that made distance necessary. Then comes the moment when everything changes. The moment many empaths reach what can only be described as the point of no return. This is not always a dramatic event. Sometimes there is no argument. Sometimes there is no final betrayal. Sometimes there is no explosive confrontation. Instead, there is a realization, a quiet realization that settles deep inside the heart, a realization that feels different from every realization before it. For years, the empath believed things could improve. For years, they believed conversations would matter. For years, they believed love would matter. For years, they believed love would inspire change. For years, they believed patience would eventually be rewarded. Then one day, that belief disappears. And when it disappears, everything else changes with it. The point of no return is not the moment an empath stops caring. It is the moment they stop believing. They stop believing that another conversation will create a different outcome. They stop believing that another chance will produce different behavior. They stop believing that another sacrifice will finally be appreciated. They stop believing that their love can save someone who does not want to save themselves. This shift is incredibly powerful because belief is what kept them invested for so long. Hope was the fuel behind every second chance. Hope was the reason they stayed after disappointment. Hope was the reason they continued fighting when logic suggested they should leave. Once hope disappears, the relationship loses the force that was holding it together. One of the clearest signs of this change is that the empath stops explaining. For a long time, they explained everything. They explained their feelings. They explained their boundaries. They explained their pain. They explained their concerns. They explained exactly what needed to change. When someone truly reaches their limit, they often stop explaining because they realize the message has already been delivered many times. The problem is no longer communication. The problem is willingness. They understand that repeating the same truth again will not create a different result. The empath also stops chasing. This surprises many people because chasing became such a familiar part of the relationship. The empath was often the one trying to reconnect after conflict. The empath was often the one trying to repair misunderstandings. The empath was often the one trying to restore harmony. But once the point of no return is reached, that pursuit ends. Not because they suddenly become uncaring, not because they suddenly become selfish, but because they finally understand that a healthy relationship cannot survive if only one person is doing the chasing. It is like trying to clap with one hand. No matter how hard you try, you cannot create the sound of connection alone. Another major shift occurs when the empath stops rescuing. Many empaths spend years trying to save people from consequences, pain, loneliness, or emotional struggles. They become problem solvers. They become emotional caretakers. They become the person everyone relies on. Yet, eventually they realize something important. No matter how much support they provide, they cannot force growth. They cannot force accountability. They cannot force change. People change when they choose to change. Not when someone loves them enough. Not when someone sacrifices enough. Not when someone waits long enough. This realization frees the empath from a burden they were never meant to carry. At the same time, they stop proving their worth. This may be one of the most important transformations of all. For years, they may have tried to earn appreciation. They may have tried to earn respect. They may have tried to earn loyalty. They may have tried to demonstrate their value through kindness, patience, understanding, and sacrifice. Eventually, they realize that healthy relationships do not require constant proof of worthiness. Genuine respect is not something that must be earned over and over again. Genuine love does not require endless demonstrations of value. The empath stops trying to convince people of their importance. They stop trying to make people see what should already be obvious. They stop trying to prove what should never have required proof in the first place. This creates a calmness that can be mistaken for indifference. But it is not indifference. It is acceptance. That distinction is extremely important. Many people assume the empath has become cold. They assume the empath no longer cares. They assume the empath is trying to punish them through distance or silence. In reality, the empath has often moved beyond anger. Anger still contains emotional attachment. Anger still contains emotional investment. Acceptance is different. Acceptance means seeing reality clearly. Acceptance means releasing the struggle to change what cannot be changed. Acceptance means letting go of the fantasy and facing the truth. This is why people often misunderstand what happens next. They believe the empath is seeking revenge, but revenge requires energy. Revenge requires focus. Revenge requires continued emotional involvement. Most empaths reaching this stage are no longer interested in revenge because they are focused on recovery. They are focused on healing. They are focused on rebuilding themselves after spending so much time trying to repair someone else. Their silence is not a weapon. Their silence is often a sign that they are finally listening to themselves. For years, they listened to excuses. For years, they listened to promises. For years, they listened to reasons why things would eventually improve. Now they begin listening to their own needs, their own feelings, their own intuition, their own truth. This process can look cold from the outside, because people are accustomed to seeing the empath give endlessly. When that giving stops, it feels shocking. Yet what is really happening is balance. The empath is finally directing some of that compassion inward instead of giving all of it away. The most striking part of this transformation is how quiet it usually is. There is often no dramatic speech, no grand announcement, no desire to create a scene. the empath simply stops forcing what no longer works. They stop arguing with reality. They stop begging for effort. They stop waiting for change. They stop carrying responsibilities that belong to someone else. The door closes quietly. Not because the pain was small, not because the relationship was unimportant, but because the empath understands that some endings do not need noise. Some endings happen in silence. Some endings happen through acceptance. Some endings happen when a person finally chooses peace over possibility, reality over fantasy, and self-respect over endless sacrifice. And once that choice becomes clear, the person standing on the other side often realizes far too late that the empath they believed would always stay has already been gone in their heart for a very long time. They are left standing in the echo of a presence that has already departed, wondering what happened, while the empath is already miles away, finally breathing freely for the first time in years. As we come to the end of this journey, one truth stands above all the others. Empaths are not people who give up easily. In fact, they often hold on longer than anyone expects. They forgive deeply because they understand pain. They see the good in people, even when others cannot. They keep believing, keep hoping, and keep giving chances because their hearts naturally look for healing instead of judgment. This is why many people misunderstand them. They mistake kindness for weakness. They mistake patience for endless tolerance. They mistake forgiveness for permission. But every empath eventually reaches a moment where reality becomes impossible to ignore. Repeated betrayal changes something inside even the most compassionate person. Not because their heart becomes smaller, but because their vision becomes clearer. The moment an empath realizes that the hurt was not a misunderstanding, not an accident, and not a temporary mistake, trust begins to fade. They start seeing patterns instead of promises. They start seeing actions instead of words. They start accepting what is happening instead of holding on to what they wish would happen. And once trust disappears, everything else begins to change. The greatest myth about empaths is that they never leave. The truth is much deeper than that. Empaths often stay through storms that would make others walk away. They stay through disappointments, broken promises, emotional distance, and countless moments of doubt. But when they finally leave, it is rarely an emotional reaction. It is usually the result of a long and painful process that happens silently within them. By the time they walk away, they have already spent months or even years fighting for the relationship in their heart. They have already exhausted every reason to stay. They have already given every chance they could give, and that is why the point of no return is so powerful. It is not the moment an empath stops loving someone. It is the moment they start loving themselves enough to stop accepting what hurts them. It is the moment they realize that protecting their peace is not selfish. It is necessary. It is the moment they understand that self-respect must become stronger than hope. And once that lesson is learned, there is often no going back. What the other person fails to understand is that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. The empath may still forgive. They may release the anger, let go of the resentment, and wish the other person well. But forgiveness does not mean they have to return. Forgiveness does not mean they have to give access. Forgiveness does not mean they have to give access to their heart again. Many people believe that if the empath forgives, they must also reconcile. This is a dangerous assumption that keeps people trapped in cycles of abuse and disappointment. The empath eventually learns that they can forgive from a distance. They can release the emotional weight without reopening the door. They can wish someone well while still protecting themselves from that person's harmful patterns. This is one of the most mature and difficult lessons an empath can learn, and it is often the lesson that finally sets them free. They no longer feel the need to punish the other person. They no longer feel the need to prove they were right. They simply move forward, carrying the wisdom of their experience without being weighed down by it. If today's video resonated with you, take a moment and reflect on your own experiences. Sometimes the most important lessons in life are not about who stayed. They are about what finally taught us our worth. And sometimes the strongest act of love is not holding on. It is knowing when to let go. It is recognizing that staying in a relationship that diminishes you is not a tribute to your love. It is a betrayal of yourself. The empath who finally walks away is not abandoning the relationship. They are finally honoring themselves. They are finally giving themselves the compassion they have always given to others. And that is not a loss. It is a victory. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video and want more deep insights into empaths, relationships, psychology, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns of human behavior. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Also, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content for people all around the world who are on their own healing journeys. And remember this, an empath's final goodbye is rarely driven by hate. It is driven by clarity. The moment they see the truth, everything changes. The silence they leave behind is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-preservation. It is the quiet closing of a chapter that could not be rewritten, no matter how many times they tried. And in that silence, they find not emptiness, but peace. Not loneliness, but freedom. Not regret, but the deep and abiding knowledge that they finally chose themselves. And in our next video, we will uncover another powerful secret about the empath mind that most people never recognize until it is too late. A truth that will change the way you see empathy, boundaries, and love forever. Until then, protect your heart, honor your journey, and never underestimate the strength it takes to walk away from what is breaking you.